the Strauss Frank ancestor story. It all comes from my grandma. You see her here? Born in 1910. And right there is my mom right next to her. Grandma was this lovely, warm person who in some ways took after this Strauss family of Cincinnati. But her father here was known as being kind of stern. So what I wanted to do was look at my grandmother's grandparents' generation. So we're going back, far into the 1800s. And you see this man right here? This is Ferdinand Strauss. Age 16, Ferdinand Strauss and his sister right here, that's my great-great-grandmother right there, Regina Strauss. They somehow make it to Cincinnati in the 1870s and join the elder Ferdinand Strauss, who miraculously in 1849 founded his liquor business, F. Strauss and Company. Regina Strauss here met Bernard Frank from Alsace-Lorraine. When he was 19 years old, the Franco-Prussian War happened where Germany took over Alsace, at a time where a lot of Jews left. And so he somehow made it to Cincinnati, and Bernard Frank from France married Regina Strauss. And that began the Strauss-Frank story. The Franks became the name of my grandmother. They moved to New York. My great-grandfather, Arnold Frank, working as a young man in a shirt store on 83rd Street in New York City. Why was he so serious when this Ferdinand was known to be this bon vivant, never married, a bachelor, but I found him traveling all around the world. Amazingly, the one thing remaining in the family, there it is this golden-handled mug from Ferdinand Strauss. Look at that mustache. Can you see that? It had to be made in the, 100 years ago at least. And he died in 1930. And so Ferdinand Strauss was this liquor dealer, traveling salesman. The Strauss family was all in the social papers. And there were 3/3. And they were all kind of outgoing, popular. Another Ferdinand owned the Cincinnati baseball team. He was very successful as well. But Ferdinand was known by Grandma, and that was great Uncle Ferd to Grandma, as the most friendly, warm-hearted. Everybody knew him. Ferdinand was great. But for some reason, Bernard Frank, who married Regina Strauss, had a different story. Look, there's a map, there's history, there's family trees, there's documents. Reform Judaism came from Cincinnati, where the great Rabbi Isaac Wise married Regina Strauss and Bernard Frank. But Bernard Frank, I discovered, ran a restaurant and saloon. Of course, he got the alcohol from his Strauss relatives. But suddenly, this is what I found in 1889. Check this out. Embarrassed, the well-known saloon keeper skips town. 1 year later, was found in New York City as a wine merchant. And that's where my family begins, in New York City in 1890. And 70 years later, my family, the great-grandchildren were born. The wealthy Strauss family turned into a Frank family that was poor. My great-great-grand-aunt Adele wrote this information. Look, neighborhood type in New York City, poor. So the Frank side now, even though the Strauss family was wealthy, was not only a liquor dealer, but a diamond dealer, the wealthy Sigmund Strauss, who married late in life a famous singer, Dorothy Strauss. And yet now the Franks were poor. And then Bernard Frank died at a young age. And perhaps this explains what happened for my great-grandfather, Arnold Frank. There he is. He ends up taking the family, without any explanation, we never knew, to Atlanta. He ran these men's stores. And then suddenly he was back. Turns out he lost his job, and then the Depression happened, etc. And then in middle age, Arnold Frank had to go to High Point, North Carolina, to take a job when he was unemployed at the age 58 and he was the manager of the Charles store, where he ended up in 5 years dying. In the very end, I found this letter in which Arnold Frank writes to his sister Adele and says in a very melancholy way, I suppose I'll stay here for a while. It'll be good for her morale and mine, meaning he's going to bring his wife. While we descendants in the Strauss-Frank line carry the perseverance and accomplishment of the Cincinnati Strausses, we also carry a more complicated history reflected in Arnold's life. In that same 1942 letter, he considers the doubts he has in his own life at middle age. And he actually wrote this. He wrote to his sister, Adele, what will be about everything. We are only puppets who move when the strings are pulled. Otherwise, why am I here?
Wow.
The Strauss-Frank story may offer clues as to why one generation thrives and another suffers, why one is remembered and another vanished. Why indeed is it that the historical American hardships of immigration, war, and financial depression may lead some to overcome gallantly, some to suffer melancholy, and some, like Arnold's children, this is the good news, Grandma Carol and her brother Sig, to embrace life with optimism and love despite often challenging circumstances surrounding them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit on my Strauss-Frank family.